Imagine it is 64 AD. You are a local leader in a small underground community scattered across modern-day Turkey.
Right.
And the cultural temperature is just, well, it's rising rapidly. Your neighbors have started boycotting the businesses of the people in your congregation.
Because you refuse to participate in the local pagan festivals, yeah.
Yeah, precisely. So if you compromise your message just a fraction, if you just tell your people to burn a tiny pinch of incense to the emperor and view it as a civic duty rather than worship you save families from starvation.
You keep fathers out of prison.
Right. But if you hold the line, you risk losing absolutely everything. What do you do in that moment?
I mean, the pressure to cave would be immense.
Yeah.
The pragmatic voice in your head would be screaming at you to find a middle ground, to lower the temperature, to find some way to make the truth more palatable to the hostile culture surrounding you.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am so glad you are joining us for this deep dive. Today, we are taking a hard look at a text that acts like a spiritual MRI for anyone in a position of influence.
A very convicting MRI.
Oh, absolutely. We are analyzing 1 Peter 5, verses 1 through 7. Our goal here is to uncover the biblical blueprint for spiritual leadership under fire. And this applies directly to church officers, absolutely, but it also extends to anyone influencing others in a Christian context.
Right, like if you lead a family.
Yeah, or if you manage a business, or if you mentor someone younger. This blueprint is going to challenge your default instincts.
Well, the contrast we are about to see is severe. Because if you look at the world's metrics for leadership, especially the corporate models we see today, what do you find?
You find visibility, right?
Visibility, control, charisma, crisis management skills, results you can count on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
The scriptural standard is entirely different. It demands faithfulness, humility, a willingness to suffer, and above all, a resemblance to Christ. The world crowns the ambitious self-starter, but heaven delights in the individual who quietly washes feet.
Which brings up a question we see playing out in the news constantly, right? Why do so many modern ecclesiastical structures collapse under pressure?
It is a constant stream.
It is. Another massive platform crumbles. Another celebrity pastor falls. The crisis of modern leadership is, at its core, a crisis of theological fidelity. It is driven by importing secular marketing strategies and chief executive mentalities straight into the church.
Yeah, the CEO model.
Yeah. But before we get into Peter's strict instructions for how to fix this, we have to look at the terrifying historical circumstances surrounding his original audience. Because Peter isn't writing this from a comfortable air-conditioned office.
Not at all. That context is everything.
Yeah.
You cannot grasp the weight of these commands without understanding the crucible these believers were living in.
Right.
Peter addresses this letter to the elect exiles scattered across Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. If you are looking at a map today, that covers a massive portion of modern-day Turkey.
And the timing is crucial, isn't it?
Very crucial. This is the mid-60s AD, right around the time of the Neronian persecutions.
Let's get really specific about what that persecution looked like, because sometimes we hear persecution and we immediately think of the Colosseum and lions.
Yeah, it's a Hollywood version.
Yeah, but at this specific time, it wasn't a universal legal ban on Christianity where Roman soldiers were kicking down doors in every province, right?
No, that is correct.
Yeah.
We are looking at localized, intense, community-driven hostility. In the Greco-Roman world, religion was not a private weekend activity. The entire fabric of society was interwoven with the imperial cult and pagan temple worship.
Everything was tied to it.
Everything. The meat market was tied to the temple. The trade guilds, which were the ancient equivalents of labor unions, all had patron deities. If you were a blacksmith or a baker, your guild held regular feasts that included sacrifices to pagan gods.
So if you are a Christian and you refuse to participate in the guild feast because it involves idol worship, what happens?
Well, you are expelled from the guild. Yeah, that means you lose your clients. You lose your supply chain. It leads to immediate economic disenfranchisement. Furthermore, your neighbors start viewing you with intense suspicion.
Because you are bucking the system.
Exactly. And if a plague hit the city, or if the crops failed, the local pagan population would blame the Christians. They believed the Christians angered the gods by refusing to worship them.
So these believers face severe social ostracization, public slander, and the constant threat of localized, mob-driven trials.
They were viewed as subversives, a threat to the peace of Rome.
That kind of pressure acts like a massive centrifuge. It spins everything at high speed, and whatever is heavy and solid stays, and whatever is weak flies apart.
That is a great way to put it.
Well, in the chapter just before our text, in 1 Peter 4, verse 17, Peter states that judgment begins at the household of God. Then, the very next breath, as he transitions into chapter 5, he begins with the words so, or therefore.
Yeah, the structural link there is undeniable. Peter's saying, because the fiery trial has arrived, and because God is using this fire to purify his own house, therefore, I have a word for the leaders.
Because the leaders are going to be tested first.
Absolutely. When a congregation faces that kind of socioeconomic terror, the local leadership will be sifted immediately. Weak individuals will generally do one of three things.
Okay, lay those out for us.
First, they might abandon the post entirely out of cowardice, leaving the sheep to fend for themselves.
The hireling fleeing.
Right. Second, they might exploit the crisis to secure their own personal safety, making backroom deals with local magistrates. Or third, they might become tyrannical, using fear to control a panicked congregation.
Let's push on that second option for a minute.
Okay.
If I am leading a church in the 1st century and my congregation is facing absolute ruin, I mean, families are hungry, businesses are closing, how tempting would it be to just compromise the message to lower the temperature?
Oh, it'd be...
I can hear the rationalization now, you know? Like, if we just soften the exclusive claims of the gospel, we can survive this. We can live to fight another day.
The temptation would be overwhelming. Think about the human instinct for self-preservation. Pragmatism always looks for the path of least resistance.
Always.
If burning a tiny pinch of incense to the emperor means your children get to eat this week, the pragmatic leader takes the deal. They would justify it by saying, God knows my heart, this is just a civic formality.
Just playing the political game.
Right. But Peter is writing to ensure that these leaders do not take that path. He knows that if the leadership collapses into pragmatism, the scattered congregations will be devoured by the roaring lion of paganism. Faithful under-shepherds act as human shields between the Roman wolves and the vulnerable flock.
This extreme pressure is precisely why the church cannot rely on a single, isolated celebrity figurehead.
No, the structure cannot hold that weight.
If you have a pyramid structure, and that one guy at the top breaks under the pressure of Rome, the whole church fractures, it all comes tumbling down. So Peter introduces a totally different structural defense.
He introduces a model of leadership built on parity and shared accountability. Look at how Peter identifies himself in verse 1. He writes, So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed.
The phrase fellow elder stands out immediately. Stop and think about who is writing this.
Right, the resume of Peter.
This is Peter. He walked on water. He stood on the Mount of Transfiguration. He preached at Pentecost and thousands were converted. Yet he walks into this letter and calls himself a fellow elder.
When Peter wrote this, he chose a very specific Greek term, sympresbyteros. The ecclesiastical weight of that single word is staggering.
Break that down for us.
Well, he deliberately avoids using the special, elevated titles you would expect. He does not use the word for priest, which is hierarchies. He does not use civil titles that denote ruling authority, like archon or despots.
Which would have been the norm in that culture.
Exactly. By choosing sympresbyteros, he establishes absolute parity. He establishes collegiate accountability within the church.
That is a massive shift from the Old Testament priesthood or the Roman political structure, isn't it? Rome was all about the pyramid.
Top down.
The emperor at the top, the patricians below him, all the way down to the slaves.
It is a complete departure from the surrounding culture. The text shows a clear historical transition happening right before our eyes. The church is moving from the extraordinary, temporary apostolic office to the ordinary perpetual governance of local elder boards.
So he isn't passing down an apostolic baton to one specific guy?
No, Peter does not establish an ongoing apostolic succession here. He does not appoint a single visual head over the universal church. Instead, he passes the ordinary care of the flock to local plural boards of presbyters.
So this structure refutes hierarchical systems entirely. It dismantles the idea of papal supremacy and the concept of a single infallible earthly head.
100%.
The church is governed by plural, co-equal elders who answer directly to the word.
Spot on.
Yeah.
The local church is not meant to be a monarchy. It is not meant to be a dictatorship run by a solitary visionary. It is a body guided by a plurality of qualified men who hold one another accountable.
Plurality is key.
Yes, and when Peter calls himself a fellow elder, he strips away all the pomp and clerical pride that so often infects religious institutions. He puts himself on the same level as the unknown, unnamed leaders struggling in the dusty towns of Galatia.
Here is how I picture this. It is like a high-ranking corporate founder, the guy whose name is on the building, the guy who funded the whole operation, walking onto a loud, dirty factory floor.
Oh, I like this.
He takes off his tailored suit jacket, puts on a hard hat, picks up a wrench, and introduces himself to the crew as a fellow shift worker. It instantly destroys any pretense of aristocracy.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. It brings the focus back to the shared labor. The authority Peter claims is not based on a glittering institutional title or a corner office. It is grounded in his status as an eyewitness to the historical reality of the cross and his shared hope in the coming glory. He is a brother walking alongside other brothers in the trenches of ministry. He is saying, I know the suffering you are facing because I am a witness to the sufferings of Christ. We are in this together.
Since these leaders are co-equals working on the factory floor, what specific labor are they called to perform? Because a title without a function is useless. Let's look at the actual mandate in verse 2.
The central command in verse 2 is incredibly clear. Peter writes, "Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight."
I want to break down the mechanics of this command. In the original language, the wording here carries a sense of extreme urgency.
It does. The main verb used for shepherding requires immediate, comprehensive, and decisive action. It is not a suggestion for next quarter's agenda.
It's not a whiteboard session.
Right. It is the kind of language a commander uses in a crisis. Shepherding is not passive. It involves feeding the flock with expository preaching. It involves actively protecting them from the wolves of heretical doctrine.
And discipline, right.
Yes, guiding them through loving biblical discipline. You are out in the field with the sheep, bearing the elements, fighting off the predators.
And that command is immediately followed by the phrase, exercising oversight.
Yes, the term for exercising oversight describes the functional execution of that pastoral care. Now, this is a point of massive theological weight. In the New Testament, the terms for elder, overseer, and pastor are not three separate ranks in a hierarchy.
Okay, wait, help me understand this, because in a lot of modern church structures, you see a senior pastor at the top, a board of overseers or a bishop above him, and then a group of lay elders below him. You are saying the text collapses all of that into one role.
Completely. The biblical model refutes the systems that separate the bishop from the elder or the pastor from the elder. The term elder points to the dignity and spiritual maturity of the man. Yes. The term overseer points to the function of the office, which is to look out for the spiritual well-being of the people. And the term pastor or shepherd describes the practical daily labor: maturity, oversight, and feeding. One office, three facets.
That clears up so much confusion, and there is a critical boundary line drawn right in the middle of verse 2. The flock they are shepherding does not belong to them. Peter explicitly calls it the flock of God.
The flock belongs exclusively to God. Leaders are stewards, not owners. They are handling holy property purchased by the blood of Christ.
They don't get to do whatever they want with it.
No, and this concept demolishes the pragmatism-driven church growth models that treat the congregation as a consumer base or a market to be captured.
Okay, let's be real about the modern landscape. We see churches today using demographic studies, massive marketing algorithms, and focus groups to target specific types of attendees.
It happens all the time.
They study zip codes to figure out what kind of music the locals want, what kind of coffee they drink, and how long the sermon should be to maintain engagement. How does treating the church as God's flock fundamentally break that consumer-driven approach? Is Peter really saying we should ignore practical growth strategies?
Well, a consumer-driven approach assumes that the church is a product to be sold and the people are customers to be satisfied.
And the customer is always right.
Right. If the customer does not like the product, you change the product. If the customer is offended by the biblical doctrine of sin, you soften the doctrine of sin. You cater to their felt needs to increase your market share and your weekly attendance metrics.
But if the church is the flock of God,
the equation changes entirely. Sheep do not dictate their own diet. The shepherd feeds them what they need for spiritual health, which is the pure, unvarnished word of God.
even if they don't want it at first.
Exactly. The pragmatic model seeks numerical success by adapting to the culture. The biblical model demands faithful stewardship of God's people, even if that means the numbers shrink because the truth is unpopular.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. If you are a leader, you don't get to run a focus group on the sheep to find out what kind of grass they prefer today. You take them to the pastures of Scripture, whether they initially like the taste of it or not.
Because the goal is not a crowded building. The goal is a healthy, holy flock that resembles the chief shepherd.
Because the temptation to treat the church like a business or a personal kingdom is so intensely strong, Peter lays down three strict negative-positive contrasts regarding a leader's motives. He knows the human heart is prone to corruption, especially when you hand a man a microphone and an audience.
He anticipates the pitfalls perfectly. In verses 2 and 3, he outlines exactly how this oversight must be executed by exposing the hidden motives of the heart.
Let's walk through those.
The first contrast addresses the motive of compulsion versus willingness. He says to exercise oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you.
Let's talk about that idea of compulsion. What does it actually look like for someone to lead a church because they feel forced to?
Compulsion refers to an external legalistic pressure. It means a man is doing the work out of guilt, or mere institutional duty, or perhaps a fear of losing his salary if he steps down.
Or pressure from the congregation.
Right. Sometimes a congregation places immense pressure on a man to take the role because he is a successful businessman, and they assume his corporate skills will translate to spiritual leadership.
Which happens constantly.
And when a leader operates under that kind of constraint, the ministry becomes resentful drudgery. He is clocking in and clocking out.
And you can always tell when someone is leading out of duty rather than love. The joy just evaporates. So what is the positive side of that contrast?
Willingly, according to God. True leadership relies on an internal call generated by sovereign grace. It is not humanly engineered.
It comes from the inside out.
Yes. The leader desires the work because the Holy Spirit has placed a holy, uncoerced willingness within his soul. He wants to care for the flock because he loves the chief shepherd. It is a joyful, voluntary submission to the task.
The second contrast targets the wallet. This is where it gets incredibly convicting, not for shameful gain, but eagerly.
The term used here for shameful gain describes a mercenary mindset. In classical literature, this word described a person who would stoop to any moral degradation, any dirty trick to secure a monetary profit. Peter is explicitly targeting the mercenary spirit in ministry.
This directly rebukes the modern prosperity gospel, doesn't it? We see ministers flying in private jets, living in sprawling mansions, and constantly asking their poorest followers for seed money.
It utterly destroys the prosperity gospel, but it also condemns more subtle forms of financial compromise. It condemns any minister who uses the pulpit for financial security, brand building, or social prestige.
Right, it's not always just a private jet. Sometimes it's book deals or speaking fees.
Absolutely. In the ancient Greco-Roman world, private religious associations were often run by charlatans who exploited their followers for money. Traveling philosophers would charge exorbitant fees for their wisdom. Peter establishes a standard of absolute financial transparency and integrity.
So no grifting allowed.
No grifting. If a man views the local church as a career ladder, a networking hub, or a platform for personal branding, he stands condemned by this prohibition.
You might be wondering why Peter cares so much about what these guys are getting paid, especially when the church is underground and facing persecution. But the logic is clear. If a leader is in it for the money, what happens when the Roman magistrate threatens to confiscate the church's funds or the leader's personal property?
The mercenary will flee. The hireling cares nothing for the sheep when his own pocketbook is threatened. Jesus taught this explicitly in John 10. The hireling sees the wolf coming and runs away.
So what is the counter to that?
The positive counter to shameful gain is eagerness, a ready, passionate, and uncoerced devotion. The faithful shepherd runs toward the work, not because it pays well, often it pays terribly and costs him dearly, but because the sheep are precious to God.
The third contrast moves from money to authority. Not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock.
The language here describing a domineering leader is intense. It means to exercise harsh, tyrannical control. It describes bringing others under your thumb in a heavy-handed, abusive way.
We hear about this a lot today.
We do. Peter explicitly warns against the spiritual abuse of pastoral authority. You cannot weaponize your position. You cannot demand unquestioning loyalty or silence biblical concerns from the congregation under the guise of touch not God's anointed.
We see that kind of spiritual abuse so frequently today. A leader builds a culture of fear. If you question his vision, you are labeled divisive and pushed out of the community. It is a complete inversion of biblical leadership. So what is the alternative to spiritual tyranny?
Peter says it is being an example. And the original term for example here is fascinating. It revolves around the word typos.
I love this analogy. A typos is an ancient metal die or stamp used to strike coins, right?
Yes, exactly.
You take a blank piece of metal, you place the heavy die over it, and you strike it with a hammer. The image on the die is permanently pressed into the coin. Peter is saying the leader's life is the heavy press that stamps the image of Christ onto the congregation.
That analogy captures the essence of biblical influence flawlessly. You lead by going first into suffering and holiness, not by shouting orders from the rear.
You can't just tell them what to do, you have to show them.
The elder's life must be a holy mold into which the lives of the congregation can be poured, leaving the exact image of Christ. Doctrine must take a visible form in the daily conduct of the leader. If you preach on patience, you must be the most patient man in the room.
That is a high bar.
It is. If you preach on generosity, your financial life must be an open book of giving. You cannot lead people to a place of spiritual maturity that you have not personally walked.
This raises a massive logical problem. If a leader cannot seek wealth, cannot seek fame, and cannot exercise dictatorial control, what is the incentive to endure the grueling work of shepherding?
That is the million-dollar question.
I mean, why put up with the late-night phone calls from families in crisis? Why deal with the constant criticism? Why endure the financial strain and, in Peter's day, the literal threat of Roman execution? If you strip away all the earthly perks of leadership, what is left to keep a man going?
The incentive is entirely eschatological. It looks entirely to the end of history. In verse 4, Peter points to the manifestation of the true leader of the church. He writes, "And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory."
The chief shepherd. This brings everything back to Christ.
It does. Think about Peter's own history. This connects directly back to John 21, where the risen Christ restores a broken Peter on the shores of the Sea of Galilee.
Oh, that's right, after the resurrection.
Yeah. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times out of cowardice. He failed the test of the crucible. But Jesus restores him, asking him 3 times, "Do you love me?" and then commanding him to feed his sheep.
Feed my sheep.
The Petrine model of leadership is thoroughly Christological. Christ fulfills the threefold office of prophet, priest, and king. As prophet, he speaks through his apostolic word. As priest, he purchased the flock with his substitutionary atonement, bearing their sins in his body on the tree, as Peter wrote earlier in chapter 2.
And as king.
As king, he is the chief shepherd who governs his church and appoints these under-shepherds.
So the local elders are just custodians.
Temporary custodians looking forward to the return of the owner. Faithful under-shepherds labor with their eyes fixed entirely on the final judgment seat. They know that earthly trophies, social media metrics, book deals, and cultural applause will all turn to ash.
They won't last.
Not at all. In the ancient athletic games, the winner received a crown made of celery or laurel leaves. It would wither and die within a few days. Peter says the reward for faithful shepherding is an unfading crown. It is the only true vindication.
Okay, I have heard people criticize this future orientation. They call it pie-in-the-sky escapism.
Sure, I've heard that.
They argue that if you are always looking at the clouds, waiting for Jesus to return, you are no earthly good. You ignore the practical realities of running an organization today. How is this future orientation actually the primary engine for gritty day-to-day endurance?
It is the engine because it frees you from the tyranny of immediate results.
Unpack that.
Well, if your goal is earthly success, if your goal is to be liked by your community or to build a massive campus, you will compromise the truth the moment things get difficult.
Oh!
You will panic when attendance drops or offerings decrease. You will manipulate the sheep to protect your brand.
Because your treasure is tied to this earth.
Precisely. But if your goal is the approval of the returning chief shepherd, you can endure seasons of extreme drought. You can endure slander. You can endure the social ostracization that the first century believers were facing in those trade guilds.
It gives you thick skin.
It does. The eschatological horizon gives you the stamina to keep feeding the sheep when the world, and sometimes even the sheep themselves, are biting you. You persevere because Christ sees, Christ will return, and Christ will reward.
That orientation changes everything. It strips the anxiety out of leadership because the results are not in your hands. The faithfulness is. Now, this posture of humble submission to a returning king does not stop with the elder board.
No, it extends to everyone.
Right. If the leadership is stripped of all this prestige and authority, how does the rest of the congregation react? Because human nature says if the boss isn't acting like a tyrant, the younger guys are going to try and stage a coup. This brings us into verse 5, which brings the whole church into the picture.
Peter turns his attention to the rest of the body. He writes, "Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble."
Let's start with the first part of that command. Why does he specifically single out the younger men and tell them to be subject to the elders?
You have to look at the psychology of a community under intense socio-political stress. When a crisis hits, younger men frequently develop a reactionary, radical, and insubordinate spirit.
They want to fight.
They do. They have high energy and low patience. They get frustrated with the steady, cautious, conservative leadership of the older generation. They want immediate action. They want to fight back against the Romans, or they want to drastically alter the church's strategy.
And that is dangerous.
Very dangerous. By commanding the younger men to be subject to the elders, Peter establishes a defensive wall of ecclesiastical order. This submission is meant to channel the zeal of the youth under the seasoned wisdom of the presbyters. It protects the church from fracturing into generational factions during a crisis.
A fractured church cannot survive the Roman pressure. If the young men rebel against the elders, the community tears itself apart from the inside before the local magistrate even has to lift a finger.
The enemy wins without trying.
Yeah. Then Peter broadens the command to everyone. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. There's a fascinating historical image behind the word used for clothe yourselves.
It is an exceedingly rare and vivid term. The word specifically refers to the act of tying on the white apron of a bondservant, known as the incumboma, over your daily garments.
An apron.
Yes. That apron protected the inner clothes from dirt and instantly identified the wearer as a slave performing menial labor.
Think about the shock value of that command to a Roman citizen. In a culture obsessed with status, honors, and public dignity, Peter tells the entire congregation to tie on the apron of the lowest class of human being. It is a deliberate historical echo of Jesus in the upper room, isn't it?
Unquestionably. In John 13, Jesus took off his outer garments, tied a towel around his waist, and washed the disciples' feet. Peter's pride initially revolted against that display of humiliation.
You tried to stop him.
He did. He told Jesus, "You shall never wash my feet." Peter could not handle the idea of the Messiah doing the work of a slave. But now, decades later, Peter understands. The cross changed his entire paradigm. He commands the entire church to actively wrap themselves in that same apron of a slave.
Tying on the apron of the lowest servant is the only way to wear the uniform of Christ's kingdom. It is a massive paradox. You climb higher in the kingdom by taking the lowest seat.
Yes.
And Peter backs up this command by quoting Proverbs 3.34. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
We need to pay very close attention to the word opposes. In the original language, it is a military term. It means to draw up an army in battle array.
That is terrifying.
It should make us tremble. When a believer harbors a proud, insubordinate, or radically individualistic spirit, God draws up his heavenly army in battle array against them. You are not just out of fellowship with your local church. You are actively fighting against the sovereign God of the universe. This directly challenges modern expressive individualism. Our modern culture teaches us to assert our rights, to build our personal brand, to trust our own truth, and to reject any authority outside of ourselves.
Culture praises that.
It does. But Peter says that attitude places you squarely in the crosshairs of divine opposition.
If you are listening to this and you manage a team or lead a small group, think about your default reaction when someone challenges you. Do you bow up? Do you assert your dominance? Because according to this text, the moment you let pride dictate your response, God aligns himself against you.
He sets his face against you.
True, structural humility toward other people is impossible unless a person first understands how to handle their own internal fears and burdens before God. We can't act humbly toward each other if we are secretly terrified about our own survival. That brings us to verses 6 and 7.
Peter writes, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you."
The mighty hand of God. That phrase carries massive Old Testament weight. It is not a soft, therapeutic image.
Not at all. It is the same hand that brought plagues upon Egypt and delivered the Israelites through the Red Sea. It is the hand that sent Israel into exile in Babylon when they fell into idolatry.
It is a hand of discipline.
Yes, it possesses total sovereign authority to discipline, prune, and protect the New Covenant Church. To humble yourself under that mighty hand means to bow beneath his providence. You accept the fiery trial as part of his sovereign plan. You accept his discipline, and you trust his timing. You don't try to manipulate the circumstances to force an outcome.
And the practical daily expression of that humility is found in verse 7, casting all your anxieties on him.
The connection Peter makes here is brilliant, and it is something modern psychology completely misses. We often treat anxiety as a psychological weakness or just a natural emotional struggle caused by stress.
Right, like an involuntary response.
Yes, but Peter connects it directly to pride. Anxiety is often a manifestation of pride because it is the false assumption that a human being has the capacity to control outcomes that belong exclusively to God.
That is a hard pill to swallow. I'm anxious because I am proud.
Think about the mechanics of worry. When we worry obsessively about the future, about our reputation, about the financial survival of the church, or about whether the local Roman magistrate is going to arrest us tomorrow, we are secretly acting as if we are the sovereign rulers of the universe.
We are trying to carry weight we weren't designed to carry.
Exactly. We are trying to carry the mental weight of controlling the future. Humility recognizes that you are not sovereign. You are a creature. You do not control tomorrow.
The term for anxiety here describes distracting cares, things that divide the mind and pull you in a dozen different directions. It is the mental fragmentation that happens when you try to run the universe. And the command is to cast those anxieties. The action word used here is fascinating. It implies a forceful throwing. I picture flinging a heavy 80-pound sack of grain onto a sturdy wooden cart.
That is the exact physical motion the word implies.
Yeah.
It requires a forceful, deliberate release. You cannot hold on to the straps of the sack while it is resting on the cart. You have to let it go completely.
You can't take it back.
Right. This fundamentally rejects the modern therapeutic methods of obsessing over our worries, analyzing them endlessly, and trying to manage them through sheer willpower or breathing exercises. We throw the burden onto God precisely because His sovereignty is the only thing strong enough to bear the weight.
You throw it onto the cart of God's sovereignty. And why does He let us do that? The end of the verse gives the motive because He cares for you.
The absolute sufficiency of His providential care. The mighty hand that disciplines the proud is the exact same hand that tenderly receives the burdens of the humble. It is a beautiful balance.
It really is.
You stop pretending to be sovereign because He is mighty, and you stop despairing in the face of persecution because He cares.
This text is an absolute masterclass in survival.
Yeah.
Let's synthesize everything we have covered today. If you want to build a church or a family or a life that can withstand the crushing pressure of a hostile culture, you cannot rely on corporate strategies.
They will fail.
Spiritual leadership is cruciform under shepherding. It entirely rejects the commercialization of ministry. It demands parity and accountability among elders, destroying the hierarchical isolation that leads to moral collapse.
Amen.
It operates through exemplary holiness rather than tyrannical control. And it requires the entire congregation, from the oldest elder to the youngest new convert, to tie on the slave's apron of humility and forcefully fling their anxieties onto a sovereign God.
The Petrine model strips away all ecclesiastical vanity and pastoral pretension. It leaves the church with an unyielding paradigm. The path of the under-shepherd is marked by suffering, obscurity, and vigilance, but it is anchored in the certain return of the chief shepherd.
Here is a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. We have spent an hour dissecting the leadership failures of the modern church and the pressures of the ancient world. But bring it home to your own life.
Look in the mirror.
Yeah. If every ounce of your influence, the way you lead in your home, the way you manage your employees at your workplace, or the way you interact in your local church was audited today by the chief shepherd, what would he find? Would he find a corporate manager obsessed with building a personal brand, or a bondslave wearing a worn-out, dirty apron? The answer to that question dictates whether you are currently gathering a fading earthly prize or an unfading crown of glory. We will see you next time.